Good morning. This is Mr. Joe. I'm here to bring you this morning the story continuation of Genesis, and we're going to cover Isaac's blessing. This is very has a lot of interesting points to this story. This family is not what I would call an ideal family, Isaac's family. So we'll start with just Genesis 25, a little overview. Isaac has been married to Rebekah. They haven't had any children. Isaac is concerned. He prays to God, um, and God blesses them with a pregnancy. Um, Rebecca's concerned about it. It doesn't feel right. She feels like there's some issues with the pregnancy, and she discovers from God that she's going to have twins. And God says, "You will be born. Two nations will be born from your womb, and one will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." So that's a key point to remember as we move on through this story. Um, the older one is named Esau, and he's a skillful hunter and outdoorsman, um, and favored heavily by Isaac. He brings Isaac food. He hunts and brings him stew and food all the time, and he likes the wild game that Esau brings. And then there's Jacob. He's more favored by Rebekah, and he is what they would call, I guess, for that time frame would be called a tent body, or in our terms, a homebody. He kind of stays home. He doesn't go. He's not an outdoorsman like his brother. And interesting to note, this is kind of a key for later in the story too, as well as Jacob's name means heel catcher or trickster. So kind of a reflection of what his personality is, um, and this story right here kind of proves that as well. Esau, one day coming back from a hunt, he has failed to catch anything or kill any wild game. So he's basically hungry. He's been out for days and he's had nothing to eat. And he comes across Jacob, who's cooking some stew. I don't know where, in a field or wherever he's cooking it. Um, And he asked Jacob for the stew, and Jacob says, "Well, give me your birthright, and I'll give you the stew." And he's like, "Come on, really? I'm hungry here, man. I'm starving. I'm gonna die. I need some food." And he says, "Give me your birthright, and I'll hook you up." So lo and behold, Esau gives up his birthright to the Jacob for the stew. So let's move on to Isaac now. In Genesis 27, Isaac's starting to feel like he's getting on in age, and he's getting to that point where he needs to give his blessing. And his blessing is basically it's his will, and he's willing all of his possessions to the usually typically the oldest son. And in this case, God has already kind of told Isaac and Rebekah that the younger will serve the older. And Isaac still favors Esau. He's going to go against God's will, and he wants to bless Esau. So he calls Esau into his tent and says, "Esau, it's time for me to give you the blessing. Can you go out and hunt some game and bring me some food, and I'll bless you, when you get back." So he leaves off to go do his hunt. Rebecca overhears this discussion between Isaac and Esau, and she freaks out, and she goes to find Jacob, and she hunts down Jacob and says, "Look, Isaac, your father's about to give the blessing to your brother, your younger brother. You need to go in there and trick him that you're Esau, and you need to get the blessing." And he's like, "Well, I can't do that. How am I going to do that?" And she pulls out a goat skin, and they wrap the goat skin around his arm. It's real hairy. Esau is hairy, so that's going to be their mode of tricking him. So Jacob goes in, tells his father, "I'm Esau. I'm here for the blessing. Here's some stew." He brings a bowl of stew, and the father's like, "Wow, that's awfully quick." And you sound like Jacob. You don't really sound like Esau. So he's like, "Well, let me feel you." He reaches out his arm with the goat skin, and he feels the hair, and he's, "Well, you feel like, feels like Esau. You still sound like Jacob, but I guess you're Esau." So he gives him the blessing under this deception, and Jacob leaves. Esau comes back to bring the stew or whatever he's cooked his father for the fresh game, and his father's like, and he's like, I'm here for the blessing, Father, blah blah, and the father goes, well, I've already given it to you, and realizes that he's been tricked, right? That he's given it to Jacob. He says, your brother Jacob has tricked me, and I've given it to him. I'm sorry, I can't give out another blessing. Of course, Esau is upset and threatens to kill his brother. The mother, eventually sends him off to hide for a while for Esau to cool off. So a lot of things wrong in this. There's a lot of things you could spend hours probably talking about this, but there's a lot of things wrong in this story. You have Isaac and Rebekah. They're not together on any of their decisions in their marriage. They're not together at all. Each one of them favors a son. So Isaac doesn't even know Jacob well enough to call him out on his lie. So he trusts that was Esau, gives him the blessing anyway. Jacob tricks his brother. He's a trickster. He's not a very, I would call him almost a thief. He tricks that out of his brother, and his brother's too weak and gives it up for a bowl of stew. A lot of issues there, a lot of mistakes being made. Isaac not following God's will. Rebecca tricking, knows God's will, so she tricks rather than trust in God. She tricks, uses Jacob to trick him into getting the blessing, rather than trust that God will make it right eventually. Right, her faith in God at that point, she didn't have it. She used her own means to get Jacob the blessing. And also part of the theme today is all of us can do God's work in the world, and so ultimately, Jacob is a big tool of God's. God uses him, and he basically becomes the patriarch of Israel. And so God works through him with all his despicable nature to him, his trickster. He's a thief. Still, God is patient and works with him, and finally works through him. So it goes to show that any of us, God can work through. Any of us. Other part of it is I would like you to think, maybe as we move through this week, as you reflect on this, think about how our mistakes prevent God from using us. And mistakes. I've made mistakes in my life. Right, there's a period of my life I moved away from God. I wasn't going to church, and I still feel that God was there for me, and those periods probably would have been better in my life. My life would have been better had I been closer to him during those times. But I think about those as you go through the week. How our mistakes prevent God from using us. How did God work through your mistakes in the past week, and how can God work through them in the future? Good things to reflect on, and thank you for your time, and we'll see you soon, probably in confirmation or the next session. Thank you.